Did anyone have any introductions that they wanted to make around the table as we get started? At the beginning of the meeting? Okay, I'm not seeing any, and I believe the signage is going around, and we do have a forum. So moving on to item number 3 is approval of agenda. If everyone had a chance to look at it, if anyone had any requests for modifications, otherwise a motion. Do you need a second? I got a second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. The agenda is approved. Item number 4 is our public comment period. Was there any public present that would like to offer comments at this time? Not seeing any. Move to item number 5, submitted public comment, and I don't believe there were any submitted prior to the meeting. So looking at agenda item number 6 is comments and updates from our agency partners and military liaisons. So we can go ahead and start with Vdot.
Good morning, Madam Chair, everyone. The only update I had this morning was just a quick reminder about Vdot's 6-year plan public hearing for the FY 23-28 program. It's going to be held this coming Monday, May 9th, from 4 to 8 p.m. at the Vdot's Hampton District Office at 7511 Burbridge Drive in Suffolk. So hope to see you all there.
Thank you. And then DRPT.
Good morning, everyone. A few updates from DRPT. We published the draft FY23 6-year improvement program on April 20th. New this year, DRPT has posted the draft SIP in an interactive format. The draft program can be found on DRPT's open data portal, which is at data.drpt.virginia.gov.
Can we get you to turn your microphone on?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I did.
Thank you.
Do you need me to repeat that?
That would be great.
Sure.
I think it's still not.
Oh. Yeah, it keeps turning off. So I mentioned earlier, DRPT published the draft FY23 6-year improvement program on April 20th. And this year we have posted it in an interactive format. That draft SIP can be found at data.drpt.virginia.gov. Additionally, the Transit Service Delivery Advisory Committee, also referred to as TSDAC, has begun work on updates to DRPT's merit, capital, and operating programs, as well as our Transit Strategic Plan guidelines. TSDAC was created by state code to advise the prioritization process for transit capital and operating fund allocation at the state level. The next scheduled TSDAC meeting is next Friday, May 13th. And it is a publicly available meeting, so registration and information can be found on the DRPT website. And lastly, DRPT is encouraging all Virginians to participate in Bike Month this May, promoting biking as a commute option. Bike to Work Day will be held on May 20th. And social media, advertising, and events will be held throughout the month, raising awareness of the benefits of biking throughout the Commonwealth.
Thank you. And then was there someone here representing Federal Highways? Not seeing anybody before. Good morning. And then the Navy? Was anyone here from the Navy? Okay, so with that being all of our reports from agencies, we move to item number 7, which is approval of the consent agenda. Any comments or questions on the consent agenda? Otherwise, we'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Are there any Discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Moving right along. Item number 8 is a presentation on the Unified Planning Work Program and TPO.
This is a presentation. We were here last month. So the work program, we gave a presentation on the work program. It was put out for public comment and review to April 20th. We didn't receive any comments, so we're asking for TTAC to recommend board approval of the UPW.
Were there any comments received between the last meeting and this one? So there are no additional comments that were received. Are there any comments here at the CPAC meeting? Otherwise, we'll consider a motion.
Motion to recommend approval to the board.
Second. There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 9 is a request for action on the final report for the funding of upgrading private roads in the Vdot system.
So Rob Case was here at the March meeting to provide a presentation on this topic. I believe that the document was out for public review and comment from March 2nd through 16th. Comments were received, Rob, if you want to mention any, but those comments have been incorporated into the final report. So we are asking for TTAC to recommend approval.
Yes, I believe that the only comments we got were from Gloucester and I think one from Vdot. Gloucester had asked us to do this, so they gave us a bunch of comments. I believe Carol is satisfied.
If there weren't any other comments or questions, we'll take a motion. I'll motion to recommend board approval.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item number 10, I do believe, is a presentation from the TPO on the 22 long-range transportation, rural long-range transportation.
Good morning, everyone. To all you Star Wars fans, happy Star Wars Day. May the 4th be with you. This is actually Teresa's presentation, but I wanted to speak to this first slide. We take care of, as part of our UPWP, our Unified Planning Work Program, we have a task to take care of rural transportation planning. So the TPO, in cooperation with Vdot, maintains this ongoing transportation planning process for the rural areas in Hampton Roads. So that would cover the city of Franklin, Southampton County, which is at the table today, thank you. Also parts of Gloucester County and Surrey County. So in our current fiscal year 2022 UPWP, we have a task to update our rural long-range transportation plan, which is basically a microcosm of our urban long-range transportation plan, and it's for the localities, city of Franklin and Southampton County. And Teresa's going to be talking about that. In addition to the RLRTP, we also do regional roadway performance and safety reports for the rural areas. Make sure we have up-to-date truck volumes, bridge condition, and other transportation planning processes. So just wanted everyone to be aware that we do have this rural transportation planning task. So thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Good morning, everyone. The 2045 LRTP, which was documented through a series of reports, was adopted by the HRTPO board on June 17, 2021. It was amended later that year on October 21. The 2045 Rural LRTP is the last report of the 2045 series. There's also the third Rural LRTP developed for Franklin and Southampton County. The 2045 Rural LRTP is a vision transportation plan that includes an unconstrained list of rural priorities. The 2045 Rural LRTP builds off of the 2040 Rural LRTP. It also accounts for the V-Trans midterm needs and priorities in the area, locality plans, multiple regional studies, other stakeholder input, and public input via a public survey. Throughout the development of the 2045 Rural LRTP, HRTPO staff coordinated and received guidance from the Rural Transportation Working Group. Voting members include representation from Franklin and Southampton County. We have Carly Smith and Beth Lewis here, who were part of this working group. We also have representation from Vdot from the Edwards District and the Franklin Residency as voting members, and we also have invited participants, representation from the Southampton County CTAC, from FHWA, DRPT, and the Senior Services of Southeastern Virginia. We went about updating the rural LRTP differently this time around. As part of public engagement, we developed and disseminated a public survey. For the 2045 LRTP, we incorporated scenario planning into project evaluation. We did the same for the 2045 rural LRTP. Additionally, the 2045 rural LRTP includes a flooding vulnerability assessment. Finally, we use the updated project prioritization tool for project evaluation. This slide shows the project timeline and updating the rural LRTP. The completed tasks are colored in the light blue. Some of these tasks were completed as part of the 2045 LRTP. The lone remaining task is colored in dark blue, which is scheduled to be considered for board approval in July. The gold indicators are public engagement opportunities. And as I mentioned previously, we coordinated with our Rural Transportation Working Group throughout the development of the 2045 Rural LRTP. As part of the 2045 Rural LRTP, we developed a public survey through MetroQuest. Draft questions were vetted through the Rural Transportation Working Group. Survey participants were asked to share their transportation issues and their thoughts on transportation options. There was an opportunity in the survey to identify transportation issues on a map that was embedded in the survey. The survey was distributed and shared at various locations in Franklin and Southampton. The survey results are documented in the report, but I have the key takeaways summarized here. Top 3 regional concerns include economic development, loss of agricultural land, and housing affordability. Top 3 neighborhood transportation issues include road safety, lack of sidewalks and crosswalks, and lack of transit service. Having a safe and secure transportation system is important. The preferred bicycle and pedestrian facilities include bike lanes and shared use paths. And then there is a desire to have more transportation options, including public transit and on-demand transportation services, including Uber and Lyft. The candidate projects for the 2045 Rural LRTP were collected from multiple sources. I'd just like to point out, highlight a couple of these sources, in particular the transmitter needs and the flooding vulnerability assessment. HRTPO staff conducted an analysis to identify an overlap between the initial list of candidate projects and the V-Trans midterm needs. Additional potential candidate projects were added to the project list where a V-Trans midterm need was not already addressed by a current candidate project. HRTPO staff conducted an assessment to identify roadways impacted by statewide reported flooding and potential future flooding events. Roadways identified as vulnerable to flooding were identified as potential candidate projects. I'd just like to just point out that we also collected candidate projects from the public. They were able to submit their candidate projects through the public survey. The updated project prioritization tool was used to provide an objective, data-driven analysis in evaluating projects based on technical and regional merits. Projects were evaluated in separate categories due to the differences in criteria. Not all candidate projects could be evaluated with the project prioritization tool, but they could still be included as recommendations in the plan. As part of prioritization, Smart Scale Round 5 Category D weights were applied. Under Category D, which would apply to Franklin and Southampton County projects, safety and economic development are weighted more heavily than congestion mitigation. The last table on the slide shows our adjusted weights that are based on category D weights. You'll notice that the weights are pretty similar, given that the focus areas between the two prioritization processes do not exactly match up. Regarding transportation planning, environmental justice combines environmental awareness with racial, ethnic, and social awareness to help ensure that transportation projects do not unfairly burden populations that may experience barriers to mobility. HRTPO staff implemented its Title VI environmental justice methodology to evaluate potential impacts to Title VI environmental justice communities. Census block groups with environmental justice communities above the regional average were identified in the rural LRTP study area. Using GIS, an overlay analysis between these environmental justice communities and the candidate projects were conducted to determine the environmental impact scores. HRTPO staff summed up the environmental justice communities that intersected a project's 1 mile buffer. This total is the environmental justice impact score. Environmental justice impact scores, which range from a high of 9 to a low of 0, depict degrees of impact and not specific types of impact, since the impact could be positive or negative. We further categorize these impacts by low, medium, high. These impact scores are documented in the report. The draft recommendations are organized by the following groups: prioritize VTrans needs, prioritize recommendations, and non-prioritize recommendations. Within each recommendation group, the total project scores are given by category. So we have project scores grouped by highway, systems, demand management, active transportation, and so on. For this next slide, Kyle's going to give a quick demo of the interactive story map on the rural LRTP.
All right, thank you, Teresa. So basically everything that she talked about, we summarized in this interactive story map right here. So as we scroll down, we have the introduction, and all of this information here, the introduction and the overview of the region is listed in the rural LRTP draft plan. So we keep scrolling down. Right here, we have a map just of the region of Southampton County and City of Franklin. And then we go into our Southampton County information with the vision statement. And the same thing for the City of Franklin. And then really this interactive story map is discussing the 2045 rural LRTP transportation recommendations. So if you scroll down, Keith, please. Thank you. So this interactive map is discussing the prioritized VTrans needs. And all 30 of these recommendations, as you are scrolling through the map, you could click on each of the segments or any of the points listed on the maps, and it'll pop up a pop-up window with some of the data listed with each of these. So here's the other prioritized recommendations, and then our non-prioritized recommendations. And then lastly, what we have here is our completed and committed projects. So it's the same structure as the other 3 transportation recommendations. And this interactive story map will be available on our TPO page sometime next week. Thank you.
The entire process to update the rural LRTP is documented in the report. The chapters are listed here on the right. As for next steps, we initiated the stakeholder and public review periods. The review period for the Rural Transportation Working Group began on April 14th and ended on May 2nd. We did receive comments from the working group, and we are addressing them. Public review period began on April 21st and will end at the end of today. The TTAC review began at when the agenda was distributed on April 27th and will run through May 10th. The last step is to obtain the HRTPO board approval of the 2045 rural LRTP report. So the recommended action for this agenda item is to review the draft 2045 rural LRTP report And if you have feedback, please send your comments to me at my email address here. And we will be seeking HRTPO board approval at the July meeting. So that's all I have, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Should we expect that it'll come back to TTAC for review before it goes to the board, or will it go straight to the board in July?
I think we're coming back in June, is that correct? Dale? Yes.
Right, so any feedback that we get from TTAC members, we're gonna run them by the Rural Transportation Working Group and make sure that everything everyone agrees to the changes, and then come back in June for final approval and then the board in July.
So did anyone have any questions or comments at this point? Otherwise, I'm sure we can email them or give you a call.
Great, thank you so much.
Item number 11 is an update on the Bowers Hill Interchange study from Vdot.
All right, good morning. My name is Andrew Pike. I'm a NEPA project manager in Vdot's environmental division. Here today to speak with you about the Bowers Hill Interchange Improvement Study, really to provide you an update, focus in on the recommended preferred alternative that's where we are in the NEPA process. I want to point out that much of what you'll see today, you've seen before. Vdot presented information on the recommended preferred alternative to TTAC in November 2021 and the policy board in November 2021 as well. And we also presented similar information to the freight TAC in December 2021. So I'll point out any instances where there's new information that's really limited to the impact table, which comes later in the presentation. So starting at the beginning, a foundational step in the NEPA process is to identify a purpose and need. It sets the goals for the study. It also serves as the primary criteria for evaluating concepts. And so you'll hear me refer to these three need elements a few times today. So the purpose and need of the Bowers Hill interchange is to reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and provide additional travel choice on the I-664 corridor, including Bowers Hill interchange. So we considered a number of concepts. We considered general purpose lane concepts, managed lanes, collector distributor lanes and interchanges, transportation systems management, transportation demand management improvements, and then also transit only improvements. And all of these concepts were screened on their ability to meet the purpose and need for the study. So could these concepts reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, and provide additional travel choice. And so having screened the concepts, we arrived at a set of retained alternatives for a detailed study in the environmental impact statement. So there are three alternatives retained for detailed study in the EIS. The first of which is a no-build alternative. The no-build alternative is a requirement of this type of NEPA document. It serves as a comparison purposes for the other alternatives. And the first of the two build alternatives retained for detailed study is alternative C, which adds one managed lane and a part-time drivable shoulder in each direction of I-664, including the Bowers Hill interchange. And the second build alternative is alternative D. It's the addition of two managed lanes in each direction, including improvements to the Bowers Hill interchange itself. Both alternatives C and D met the purpose and need for the study. So both of those reduce congestion, improve travel reliability, provide additional travel choice. And as we develop concepts, evaluated concepts and moved into identifying alternatives. We're also considering rail within the corridor, specifically to comply with 2020 budget bill language from the General Assembly that directs Vdot to consider rail when conducting any study of the I-664 corridor and Southampton roads. So Vdot coordinated with DRPT, the Port of Virginia, and other agencies involved in the study, and made a determination that neither single or double rail track could fit the existing median. And that allowed us to do two things. That allowed us to assume widening to the inside in the corridor where there's no rail today. And then it also allowed us to assume widening to the outside where rail exists in the corridor today. And that second part where rail exists today, the widening also would not preclude the future addition of a double track in that segment of the corridor. So all of this information was presented to the agencies involved in the study, including the localities, and there were no objections to this determination. So how we kind of get to informing a recommendation of a preferred alternative, right? We consider an alternative's ability to meet purpose and need. We consider the impacts of a given alternative. And so this slide shows you impacts that inform our recommendation of a preferred alternative. I'll note that in the study, in this NEPA process, we're documenting a worst case scenario for impacts based on the planning level limits of disturbance. So you can see that disclaimer at the bottom. The impact shown in our worst case scenario would be refined during future phases of project development, including permitting. We wanted to just draw your attention to a few things on this slide. So you can see we've got private property impacts and then impacts to wetland and streams listed here. And you can see that alternative C is less impactful than alternative D. I would highlight that we have reduced potential residential relocations, potential impacts to residential properties for each of the alternatives. So when we shared this information with you all in November, you would have seen 91 potential residential relocations for alternative C. That's now down to 21. You would have seen 95 potential residential relocations for alternative D, and that's now down to 23. So just wanted to highlight that. And then the wetlands and streams figures here are slightly different than what we showed you in November as well, due to some refined mapping and due to accounting for reducing the limits of disturbance to reduce the potential impacts to residential residents or residential properties. So that leads us to the recommended preferred alternatives. So the recommended preferred alternative for the Bowers Hill Interchange Improvement Study is alternative C, which is the addition of one managed lane and a part-time driver shoulder in each direction of I-664. So as you just saw, alternative C is less impactful than alternative D. It also meets the purpose and need for the study. And then it also best aligns with the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Network under construction as part of the I-664 Southside High-Rise Bridge project. So that's another piece that we consider as consistency with local and regional plans, and that has an influence on this recommendation. So where are we going next? We're still in the midst of a public comment period right now on the recommended preferred alternative. We held a virtual public meeting last Tuesday. We held an in-person public hearing last Wednesday, and we're accepting comments online, by phone, by mail through May 7th. So that's this Saturday. And from there, we would anticipate HRTPO's policy board taking an action on the preferred alternative later this month. That action would be included in a presentation to the Commonwealth Transportation Board that we anticipate for June. We anticipate the Commonwealth Transportation Board taking action to identify a preferred alternative in July. And then we would move into the final steps in the NEPA process, the issuance of a draft EIS, and then moving to completing NEPA in spring 2023, with Federal Highway issuing a final EIS and record of decision. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions or comments.
How was the attendance at the in-person public hearing, and is there any way to measure it? What kind of citizen involvement did you get in the virtual public hearing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks, Troy. So we had, at the in-person meeting, we had 28 attendees. At the virtual meeting, I don't have the final number of attendees in my head, but we had, I think the other way to look at participation was how many questions we had. We had about 25 questions. So we, I can provide the final figures for how many people attended that, but yeah, good involvement. Felt like I was on the hot seat for a good chunk of Tuesday night. But yeah, and then we've got this online feedback form running, and we've got, I checked yesterday, I haven't checked this morning, over 200 or so comments so far.
Andrew, and I think you said, but I missed it. How did you reduce the relocations? I got your question. How did you reduce relocations from 90-ish to 20-ish? And is Vdot building a part-time drivable shoulder in the current high-rise bridge project?
Okay, sure. Yes, I can definitely answer the first question. I can attempt the second question. We may need to turn to Vdot district staff to step in. But yeah, speaking to the relocations, so when we assessed the initial impacts in cell 91 and 95, we zeroed in on what types of properties could potentially be impacted. And there were 3 multifamily housing units where the limits of disturbance, the planning level limits of disturbance interacted with that property. And so we reduced the LOD in those instances, pulling it in closer to the roadway by applying a retaining wall. We didn't think it was reasonable to assume that Vdot would take 3 multifamily housing units. So that accounts for the large reduction. And then for high rise, Todd, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, the high-rise bridge project that's currently under construction right now includes the infrastructure for a part-time drivable shoulder, but that part-time drivable shoulder will be open in the future. So it will include the drainage and roadway infrastructure.
And that rings a bell, but do you remember why that is?
I don't offhand, Rob. I can go back and look. I think it's based on current traffic projections.
Now, I know that there was a Bowers Hill, there was a working group. Have they endorsed the preferred alternative?
We have briefed the Bowers Hill Working Group on this, most recently in March of this year. And they haven't, as far as I know, I didn't turn to the thread to speak to whether they've taken any action. I don't believe they have, but.
Yeah, they have attended, and I think we Vdot briefed them on the plan for the next steps, but there's no official endorsement. But there are a few members around the table here who are part of the working group.
Yeah, I can just say it's Carl Jackson. We've gotten presentations, particularly from Scott. And then thank you for talking with them today. And we've generally, accepted the alternative C as moving speak of the project, as well as providing the least impacts to the surrounding area. I don't think we've taken a formal vote, but there generally hasn't been any negative feedback or comment from the alternative C. So I just want to thank Vdot staff for moving ahead with this project. I know we haven't made it easy for you all, but I think we've gotten a better study out of this that we can use to, potentially create a better project and a better Bowers Hill in the future.
Are there any other comments or questions? If there aren't any other comments or discussion, I believe that's looking for a motion on the recommendation.
I'll make that motion. Motion to approve.
And I believe the motion is to recommend approval of the preferred alternative to the TPO. Is that correct?
Yes.
So we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any additional discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Item 12 on the agenda is the 3-month tentative schedule. If you take a look at the agenda, you'll note that's June, July, and August. August, we normally don't have a meeting. That meeting is typically canceled, so at this point, you'll see that's what it shows in the agenda. We have a very busy month for June and July, and nothing listed in August. Item 13, for your information, there's a couple of items in the agenda for you to take a look at, including the HRTPO monthly executive report. For item 14, there's a couple of meeting announcements coming up. I believe also, isn't there a TPS meeting that was scheduled after the meeting?
Yeah, TPS meeting will be scheduled the third Friday of June.
So there is one coming up in
Correct.
June. That should also be, if not on here, it'll be coming up after the next meeting. And then 15 is old or new business. Anyone have new business?
Yes, Madam Chair, Vdot, we do have a few items that we wanted to bring to your attention and seek TTAC's endorsement to move on to the HRTPO meeting at their May 19th meeting. What we have in front of you are a few tip amendments for the Hampton Roads Express Lane Segment 1 project. As you all are aware, a couple meetings back, we had split the Segment 1 project, which is in Norfolk, to two different phases, phase 1A and phase 1B due to cost. What we have in front of you right now is for Segment 1A. We have the HRTPO funded project, which is the UTC 119637. What we're doing there is reducing some of the costs for HRTPO on that UPC, and we're adding two child UPCs, which you also see in front of you, 121360 and 121361. Those two UPCs are adding approximately $93.1 million of funding that was dedicated to the I-64 corridor by the 2021 General Assembly. HRTPO recently completed the conditions imposed by the General Assembly to add this $93.1 million to this project, and the Commonwealth Transportation Board will be taking action on that later this month. They'll be taking action on May 18th to include this funding. So we were hoping that we could get TTAC's endorsement, that way TPO would approve on May 19th, moving this forward.
So the action would be to recommend approval of these tip amendments to the TPO board.
Yes.
Are there any questions or comments on the submission? Otherwise, we look for a motion.
Motion.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion approved. Was there any additional old or new business to discuss?
Madam Chair, if I could, I'd just like to give a quick update on Smart Sale. You guys are all aware that the process for the pre-applications is closed and applications are closed for editing. We had 72 applications in the Hampton Roads District. We just ask that you continue to work to finalize information for your final application. By the end of the month or the last week of this month,
Vdot district office will provide comments on V-Trans needs, eligibility, and readiness on what was provided in the pre-applications. Based on the information submitted, will indicate what type of comments you can expect. If you had a detailed application, you may get some detailed comments. But if you had general basic information, then your comments will probably be the same. If anybody has any questions about their pre-application, please don't hesitate to give our district office a call.
Okay, how's there any additional old or new business, anything else?
Madam Chair, just an announcement, I think our friends at the RPT mentioned that it was a Bike to Work day on the 20th. And the city of Portsmouth will have a lunchtime bike ride starting at from 11 o'clock to, from 12 to 1 downtown Portsmouth at the Pavilion, Portsmouth Pavilion.
Anything else? If there's nothing else, meeting adjourned.